Nice to see you all. Welcome. So I wanted to start with telling everybody a story that I had a very interesting experience yesterday, but I wanted to share with you. I was sitting with Daniela, who's the woman who was just speaking to you, and I was telling her about my guru, the great H.W.L. Punjaji, this great spiritual master who I met in 1986. And we were speaking about him. And I was telling her that he was not an ordinary man. And after I said the words to her that he was not an ordinary man, a glass which was sitting on Daniela's side table, a big glass full of water, exploded. And nobody had touched this glass. It just exploded for seemingly no reason, for no cause. But it exploded at the minute when I was mentioning his name and how extraordinary he was. And I was quite astounded by this. I've had other experiences since he's passed away of his presence, which were remarkable, mysterious metaphysical events that challenge our conscious and unconscious materialistic assumptions in very dramatic ways. So I wanted to share that with you. I don't know what to make of it. I can just tell you I saw it. I was an eyewitness, so I can tell you this really did happen. I don't know what these things mean. We can only guess and speculate. But he has communicated with me in mysterious ways before, since his passing, indicating to me that he was with me in ways that were quite remarkable. So I wanted to share that. I thought you might enjoy hearing the story. There's not anything more to that story, but it's intriguing. So what I wanted to talk about tonight has to do with the paradox of non-duality, especially as it relates to the challenge of being a human being. And I think it's going to be a rather short talk because I don't have a lot to say about it at the moment, but I wanted to make one particular point that in relationship to the awakening to enlightened awareness and the whole subject of enlightenment and awakening to transcendental consciousness, there's a fundamental distinction that I always refer to, which is a traditional distinction between relative reality and absolute reality. So the awakening to about absolute reality, which includes everything that exists and everything that does not exist, is that all-inclusive perspective. Is usually what is referred to as non-duality, which means there's only one and not two. So that perspective, which includes the sum totality of all of reality, which has become to one perspective, one truth, one fundamental experience, which, interestingly enough, unexpectedly and intriguingly always conveys with it, brings with it, is a free gift, spiritual liberation, which is quite remarkable. So if this remarkable insight, perspective, experience of the sum totality of all of reality that includes everything and excludes nothing, when we are lucky enough to perceive it, to directly experience it, to directly cognize it, to directly know it, simultaneous with the knowing of the sum totality of all of reality, is the metaphysical experience of liberation, of emancipation, of indescribable inner freedom, joy, happiness, exaltation, ecstasy, peace, relief and release, and so much gratitude. So while non-duality is a state of consciousness that includes the sum totality of all of reality, it also delivers with it the state of consciousness called liberation. And that's what's very important about it. That's the whole point. Sometimes when I hear people speak about non-duality, I think they're leaving out the liberation part. And the liberation part is the whole enchilada. It's the most important part of it. It's not it's not just an experience of oneness. It's an experience of liberation, unconditional, radical, absolute, unimaginable liberation. That's the whole point. To be liberated, to experience liberation. So anyway, what I wanted to speak about tonight was the relationship between having that kind of experience and having a deep enough experience of that kind that one becomes actually stabilized or grounded in that state of consciousness, stabilized in that state of consciousness. And one mysterious, compelling attribute of non-dual consciousness and non-dual awareness is the felt gnosis, felt knowledge, felt seeing and knowing of the presence and feeling of eternity. Eternity is that which is timeless and formless, beginningless and endless and eternal. So it's the felt presence of the formless, infinite nature of the ground of being, which is infinite. And that which is infinite in this context is also that which is absolute. That which is infinite is also absolute. So, of course, what happens in this kind of state of consciousness is the realization, oh, this is who I really am. This is who I've always been. I thought I was a unique individual, Andrew Cohen, for example, in my case, belonging to a particular body, mind, personality, existing in a particular time in human history, the history of planet Earth. But then from the state of consciousness, we realized that was only a very small part of the sum totality of who I actually am. And my actual identity is the ultimate nature of reality. This is the totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist. Everything, which excludes nothing, which is a one truth. So the question is, if I'm both absolute and relative, if I'm both the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist, if I'm the non-dual absolute, incarnate in the form of this body, mind, and personality, in that recognition, I simultaneously recognize that while my true nature may be absolute and I'm without limit, without beginning, without end, my finite form, my body, mind, and personality definitely has a beginning, it has an end, it exists in time, and is subject to change and suffering and death. So what is the relationship between that deepest and highest dimension of myself that's non-relative and absolute, and that dimension of myself that's relative and finite? So that's the paradox I wanted to talk about, I want us all to think about. Because from the perspective of that which is absolute, the absolute is all there is. There is nothing else. But included in that which is absolute is also the whole world of relative reality, which is relatively real. Absolute reality is absolutely real. Relative reality is relatively real. So because absolute reality is absolutely real, that means it's more real. Absolute reality is more real, has more substance, more truth than relative reality, which is only relatively real. But it's real because it's relatively real, relatively real. So what's the relationship between that which is absolute, that which is relatively real, which is my body, mind, and personality, and your body, your mind, and your personality, and your true identity, which is unborn, uncreated, timeless, formless, beginningless, and endless, and infinite, and eternal? What's the relationship between those two? Is there any relationship at all? And of course, there is one, because as long as there's two, there's a relationship. And there is a definite distinction between relative reality and absolute reality. They're not the same thing. Even though they're made of the same stuff, they have different qualities. And so, what's the relationship between relative reality and absolute reality? Or to be concrete about it, what does it mean to be an enlightened or awakened human being who has access to non-dual consciousness, awareness of that which is absolute, and being a finite, vulnerable, fallible, imperfect, evolving human being? That's quite a distinction there. And of course, the challenge of enlightenment, which enlightenment, of course, is many things, but we can also basically say it's a state of consciousness. It's a higher state of consciousness than unenlightenment, of course. So what's the relationship between this enlightened state of consciousness, or the one who has access to this enlightened state of consciousness, and his or her very own ego, body, mind, personality? What's the relationship there? That's when things get interesting, because I think most people can agree on the nature of these higher states, because there have been enough powerfully realized human beings over the millennia that have described the same state of consciousness with similar attributes. So we know what enlightenment more or less feels like, looks like, what the experience is like. But there's not a lot of, in terms of what the understanding of the relationship between relative reality and absolute reality, the relative self and the absolute self, there's a lot of confusion about that. And even Jesus, in his last moments, who obviously was an absolute realizer, if anything, he was an absolute realizer. He was struggling with this duality and this dichotomy before his death. Father, which is the absolute, why hast thou forsaken me? So that was his human self shaking under the weight of relative suffering. So if he was struggling with this question, and he was a very extraordinary, spiritually powerfully realized being, I think that means that we all have a challenge ahead of us. So those of us who are aspiring to awaken to enlightened awareness and to aspire to become stabilized in the enlightened state of consciousness, and ultimately aspire to become exemplars of the possible. These are important questions. So one way I like to think about it, one way I'd like to help you to think about this important question I'm bringing up, which is quite simple, at least intellectually it's simple, hard to live it, which is that from the perspective of enlightenment, enlightened awareness of the absolute, there is the small self, the unenlightened self, is felt we feel its existence in our body and minds and personalities as that which is personal, that which is personal, that which is unique to me and me alone, as a separate, individual. I have my unique psychological experience, emotional experience, personal history, and feelings related to that, and you have your own. That which is personal to me is unique to me, and that which is personal to you is unique to you. So under the weight of the powerful awakening to enlightened awareness, most people who have that kind of experience see through. Part of the experience of awakening to non-duality is seeing through the illusion of the personal. There's a shocking recognition that the personal is just a veil, or it's just a sheath, or it's just a layer. It's like a thin skin that ultimately has no substance. From the perspective of that which is absolute, from the perspective of absolute reality, the layer of that which is personal is seen as being insubstantial. Insubstantial to the point of being, if the experience is very powerful, as insubstantial all the way to the point of being absolutely unreal and fictitious. So in our own experience, in your experience, in my experience, in our experience, we can see how this works when we start paying attention in our own inner subjective experience to the subjective nature of the small self, which is called the ego. And the ego feels a particular way. It tends not to feel very free, and most of the time not particularly happy. But it's felt in relationship to the big self. It's experienced as being a small self, a very small entity, a very small entity living in a very big space. And that small entity is called the personal sphere, personal domain. And that's what it feels like to be. That's what it feels like for most people to exist. Most people's experience of consciousness and of reality rarely transcends its personal sphere. But for those people who have higher and deeper state experiences which do transcend the personal sphere, they realize that who they really are infinitely transcends this personal sphere, this personal straitjacket. So in relationship to the question I'm asking, well, what's the relationship between that which is absolute and that which is relative? And as it relates to these different selves, the challenge I find for most people is to go beyond the personal. How can we express our enlightenment or our awakening to that which is absolute and not relative through this relative body, mind, and personality? And the way we can do that, simply and directly, profoundly and powerfully, is to transcend the personal domain, the personal dimension of being you. Transcend the personal dimension of being me to a significant degree. We don't have to transcend it absolutely, totally, and completely. But if we want our enlightenment or awakened awareness, vibration of this absolute reality to be able to express itself through us and as us, we have to learn how to transcend what I'm calling the personal sphere, this personalized identity, this personal feeling of being me. The personal feeling of being me. And find out what it might be like to be you, free from this personal straitjacket, this personal sphere of me-ness that feels so small. So I always encourage people not to learn how to, or to strive to cease to personally identify so intensively with their experience. And in my teaching of evolutionary enlightenment, I have 5 fundamental tenets or 5 fundamental principles, but the fourth one is called the process perspective, and I encourage people to try to see their own experience in the context of an evolving universe, and to see that we are a very small part of a very big process that's in progress, and that there's nothing in anything that you have ever experienced or ever going to experience that is truly personal and unique to you alone. In more ways, in most ways, not in every single way, but in most ways, in many ways, we're all having the same experience. And not much of it is very personal or unique to me. More often than not, most of the time, we're having the human experience. We're not having a unique personal experience. We're having the human experience, and we're all having the same experience, but we all think that there's something particularly unique and extraordinary, profound and miraculous about our particular version of this shared event. So if we can learn how to see our experience as being the product of a cosmic process that's been evolving for 14 billion years, for a very long time, we can be, as we've learned how to use the process perspective to reflect upon our experience, we can begin to see that most, not everything, but most of what we experience is not personal at all. It's deeply conditioned. Most of what, not everything, but most of what we experience is deeply conditioned. Probably 99% of what we experience is deeply conditioned. We're much more conscious robots than we might like to believe. But if we can practice through mindful awareness, if we can practice paying attention to the impersonal, deeply conditioned nature of so much of what we experience and so many of the ways we react to what we experience, we can learn how, through spiritual practice and practice of noble effort, to see how impersonal or non-personal so much of what we experience is, so much of the process, so much of the experience of being human is really part of an impersonal, is really the expression, manifest expression of an impersonal process more than it is a personal experience. It seems like a personal experience and feels like a personal experience, so people aren't paying very close attention. But as you awaken and you begin to pay closer attention to your experience, you start to see, I am a process. My body, mind, and personality is a process that's part of a larger process. It's part of a larger process. It's part of a larger process. It's all interrelated. And of course, if you've awakened to evolution, which is another exciting part of the journey of enlightenment in the 21st century, then you realize that this process is part of a process, is part of a process. It's part of a process is actually going somewhere, is on a journey of becoming. And that's very exciting to realize that the impersonal process that we all are is on a journey of becoming. That's exciting, especially if you don't only just intellectually realize it, but if you experience it inwardly, if you have the experience of the feeling of that recognition, it's very exciting and very inspiring. But the relationship between, the question we're exploring is, what's the relationship between relative reality, body, mind, personality, and absolute reality? And I'm saying that if we can learn to be less personally identified with the body, mind, personality that we are, we can find our way to a liberated state of consciousness. We can find our way back. We can find our way home. Now, this is easier said than done, because what I've been calling this the personal self, the personal feeling of being me, the ego, feels so precious. It feels so precious, so important, so intimately who I am. Even though, as I've said many times so far in this call, when you wake up, you realize it was never who you really are. To repeat, when you wake up, you realize it was never who you truly are. But that's easy to forget. So it's this feeling of being me, the small feeling of being me, that we have to learn how to transcend and go beyond and leave aside, let alone for a long time. The part of us that feels hurt and wounded and traumatized and victimized, lonely, angry, misunderstood. It feels this need for love and acceptance and recognition and affirmation. That part of ourself. It's a source of our suffering and what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body. I'm talking about the same thing. So the good news in all this is that the part of yourself that is related to absolute reality, your what's called the true self, your true self, doesn't have all these needs and unfulfilled desires and unhealed wounds because of its eternal nature. It has never been hurt, wounded, or traumatized, and could never be. So the solution to the human predicament, from the perspective of the awakening to enlightened awareness, is always the same, and it's always very simple and immediate and direct, which is to let go and transcend the small self. And you say, easier said than done. I say, it's easier said than done is true, because most people have a hard time doing that. So all I want to do is to explain this to all of you once again. I'm sure most of you know this already, but I wanted to lovingly encourage you to do it anyway. Because when you wake up to your true self, or what I call your authentic self, you will see that your ego is nothing but a source of, from the perspective of the true self, the ego is nothing but a source of pain and suffering and misery and attachment. And the sooner we can give up all the illusions that it is clinging on to, or what we recognize to be, or we discover to be the illusions that the ego clings on to, the experience we get is immediately is happiness, release and relief, joy, exaltation, uh, liberation. It's immediate. So but you have to have this experience for yourself to believe me. Otherwise, it's hard to believe it. The ego saying, "This guy just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. Doesn't understand how hard this is for me." But I do get it. I do know how hard it is. I know how hard it is. Do you know how good it is? How good it can be? That's the question. So I wanted to talk about this in a way that wasn't too esoteric. So I wanted to just to repeat to repeat this refrain of beginning to make the effort to transcend what's fundamentally a painfully personal relationship to the experience of being you. What if your relationship to being you wasn't so personal? You could still be you. You still get to be you. You still get to have the same. You still get to have the same body, the same mind, the same personality. Nobody wants to take it away from you. But could you choose, inspired by spiritual inspiration, could you choose to have a different relationship with the experience of your body, mind, and personality? Could you choose through spiritual effort, through noble spiritual effort to practice, to the practice of mindful awareness? Could you choose to not take the personal framing of the experience you're having so seriously? Could you make the spiritual effort to see through the illusion of the personal again and again and again and again? Because it's easy for me to say it's an illusion, but it's a very powerful one. It's extremely powerful, and few people actually succeed in throwing it off. Because the point is, when you can do that, when you are so deeply grounded in this non-relative or absolute relationship to the human experience, to life itself, including the human experience, including your very human experience, then in fact there is no paradox really anymore, or the paradox becomes much smaller. The experience of duality, the duality between the relative and the absolute, between being a body, mind, and personality, and being the absolute itself in human form. There ceases to be such a big distinction anymore in your own felt experience. Now the inner feeling, the inner experience is that it's all one. I am that. I am that in this context includes everything: body, mind, personality, time, space, world, universe. But finally, I am that includes everything in a non-dual embrace. And in that case, there's not such a big paradox anymore. There's always going to be a little bit of a paradox as long as we're dealing with a separate body, mind, personality. There's going to be some duality, of course. But the effect, or the blinding effect, the blinding effect of this apparent duality will be minimized. Because the deeper we go into letting go of this fixation on this personal dimension of reality, this personal filter, the deeper reality, the deeper non-dual reality of who I really am, which transcends but also includes my body, mind, and personality. It goes deeper and deeper into the soul. And that's when we become embodied expressions of enlightened awareness and relative body, mind, personalities. So there's a relative body, mind, personality that doesn't feel so relative. Sometimes it starts to feel that through this relative body, mind, and personality, the presence of the vibration of that which is non-dual and absolute seems to be sneaking through. I remember when I met my guru in 1986 in Lucknow. I realized shortly after I met him that he appeared to be an aging man, an aging older man with a lot of confidence. But when I left his presence, I was in a completely different state of consciousness, and I realized that I was with someone who was far more than who he appeared to be. He appeared to be a very confident old man. But when I left him, I realized, as a result of being in his presence, that he was much more than a very confident old man. He was transmitting and vibrating with the presence of the Absolute, which was tangible through him, just by being near him and being in his presence, giving one's attention to his physical form, seemed to give access to this non-dual state of higher consciousness in the most extraordinary way. So the question we're all left with is, can we begin to practice through noble effort, identifying less with the small self, with the personal sphere, with the personalization of the human experience, and to begin to reconsider, is this feeling I'm having right now of pleasure or pain, is it truly personal? Is the experience I'm having of fear or doubt or exaltation, is there anything really so personal about it, or is it simply the human part of the human experience and not necessarily unique to me? Can we constantly question how we feel and what we think, if it has any personal characteristics about it at all? Because in the end, if you keep on going with this kind of inquiry, this kind of investigation, you'll start to see that, as I've already said, there's nothing personal about anything we ever experience. It's all part of a process, it's in progress. And the illusion of having a personal experience is something we're all sharing. We're all having that same, we're all suffering from the same illusion, which doesn't feel very unique, does it? But what is unique, when one person wakes up from the illusion of the personal, the dream of the personal, when they wake up, then there's something about such individuals which makes them, they stand up because they become very different. They're not like everybody else because they've seen through the illusion of the personal, and because they're not identifying so compulsively, so unconsciously, in such a conditioned way, so personally with everything they experience consciously and unconsciously, which, to use Buddhist terminology, which means they're awake, or they're more conscious, less robotic, less conditioned, more inwardly free, they have access to more self-knowledge. And when they speak about the human experience, they're speaking about it more impersonally, less personally. So when they speak about the experience, when such individuals speak about the human experience, they're speaking to all of us. They're not just speaking about their own experience. Because they know that the human experience is a singularity. So I want to encourage all of you to pay attention to your experience over the next few hours, the next few days, the next few weeks. And when you remember, should you remember, ask yourself whether there's anything personal that you're experiencing, whether anything you're experiencing is truly personal and unique to you. And if you think there is, stay with it until you see through it. Because you sooner or later are going to see through all of it. And as this process continues, what can begin to happen is that the veil, the veil of what I'm calling the personal, the veil of the personal will begin to fall away. It's like almost having a suit of clothes that falls off your body. It's like a suit of an old suit of clothes or a veil that you throw off, and you begin to feel that your sense of self begins to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now your sense of self is not located in your body, mind, and personality any longer. It gets bigger and bigger and more inclusive of the totality of reality until it includes the whole universe, the whole multiverse, the sum totality of all of reality until it expands to infinity. And then you feel the sense of self that is not separate from the sum totality of all of reality, that's vibrating in and through your unique body, mind, and personality. And then you don't feel so much duality. You don't feel there's any big paradox anymore between the relative dimensions of your experience and being you and the absolute dimensions of being you. It all becomes one experience, one process, one event that's unfolding mysteriously, miraculously, exquisitely, and incomprehensibly. And that's when, interestingly enough, our minds begins to become very quiet, because you stop trying to understand everything with your mind at that point. You just start feeling more into the nature of experience. You have more of a feeling or feeling-oriented relationship to your experience, and more of an intuitive, felt relationship to consciousness, into conscious experience. And you're less trapped in the intellectual prison of the mind, which brings so much more to the table. So at this point, being you, being conscious, being alive, being conscious of being alive, and in this case, which includes this non-dual or absolute dimension of reality, feels very big. Life becomes very big. Being you just because you're conscious begins to feel very big. And it's so big because it includes the sum totality of all of reality in a way that is brings this feeling of exaltation and joy and sobriety, deep spiritual sobriety, seriousness and sincerity and gratitude. So the more we awaken to this non-dual dimension of reality, the paradox gets smaller and smaller between that which is relative and that which is absolute. And the smaller it gets, the more beautiful we become as incarnated expressions of human potential. As the paradox gets smaller, the expression of our true self gets bigger. And then you'll find that the whole universe will begin to love you. I'm not making this stuff up. It's really true. Okay, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer.
Great. So if anybody would like to ask a question, please write your question in the chat window. You find it on the bottom of your Zoom window, and I will read the question out loud. So I do have a question already, Andrew. It's coming from Adam. He is asking, in stillness, I feel the peace and the presence of the divine, and that there is a process of awakening, while at the same time, there is fear and terror of letting go of my false identities. They feel like they have taken on a life on their own as a separate force. How can I not experience this as a battle?
Maybe you can't. Maybe it is a battle. Adam, you've seen a lot of these in Vajrayana Buddhism and in Zen Buddhism, a lot of these statues of Zen masters or these Zen patriarchs holding their swords up high, do battle with the illusion of samsara and the false self. So there's some schools of some Dharma schools that see the quest for enlightenment as a battle. We have to be willing to wage a battle between our illusory self and our true self. And we have to win that battle. And so, of course, I have no problem with that kind of thinking because I think it's very apropos. But some people these days feel they don't like. They feel this is too patriarchal, too dualistic, too mythic. But I think that a big part of the awakening process, I mean, the the most beautiful part of the awakening process is that part of it which is spontaneous and effortless and easy and natural and given by grace. And that's the best part. But life is complicated and life is challenging. We tend to be very complicated, and the mind is complex. And a lot of these processes that I'm describing are very complex and multidimensional, hard to see, hard to understand, hard to discern. And if you're serious, you realize the stakes are very high, because at certain points in the awakening process, we start glimpsing into into the nature of the process as a whole, and we realize this is serious. The whole experience of the gift of life is serious, and we can be having the ability to be conscious of consciousness is serious, and realizing that enlightenment is possible is serious. And we realize that so few people are serious about life. They're living it, and they might know what it means to experience terrible suffering, but they're still not as serious about life. So then at a certain point in the awakening process, we realize, oh my goodness, this is serious. The consequences are serious, and I have to become serious. And part of that is the realization that karma, what we call karma, is actually real. Karma actually really exists. And if we're not willing to get deadly serious about the possibility of liberating ourselves for real, we're probably never going to do it. We'll probably die in the same prison cell that we were born into. And so when you realize that that's actually true, it kind of help us to wake up and get serious about our own liberation, about nurturing our own potential for liberation, and getting very serious about it, very one-pointed and focused about it, and very energized. And then we have to be willing to fight the good fight. That doesn't mean fighting anybody else. This is a battle between truth and falsehood in the nature of our own identity or identities. And I think the greatest realizers were willing to fight this fight to the death, because they realized what was at stake, and they realized how important it was. It had to be taken very seriously, and we had to be willing to fight for our own liberation. So just to repeat, as I said, the whole process of awakening is not a battle, it's not a fight, and usually the most transformative moments have nothing to do with effort or fighting, but are moments that are grace-filled and spontaneous and effortless.
And what it is with me is that I'm very serious, but at the same time, I'm very frustrated because I get the taste of awakening, the taste of enlightenment, a glimpse of it, the taste of the freedom and the peace. And then I want it all. So as I want to stay there. So maybe that's the ego that feels the state and wants to stay there all the time and is afraid of facing the other one. It sees it as a battle when it's not.
Well, I know, but I just got saying a lot of it is a battle. That's what I was saying to you. So because it is, all we have to do is we have to be willing to fight the good fight when it's necessary. You don't have to be fighting all the time, but when you're fighting for your own liberation, your own sanity, your own potential for liberation, those moments when you have to fight for it, you have to be willing to do whatever needs to be done.
Yeah.
And a lot of this, Adam, is a lot of this also has to do with trust and faith, faith in the best part of yourself, faith in your maker, faith in the process, faith in your own potential for liberation, faith in the great mystery that the mind can never recognize. My guru said to me once, when I walked into the room that he was in, after I had not seen him for a few months, the first thing he said was, "Andrew, I'm so glad you found a friend you'll never be able to see. Andrew, I'm so glad you found a friend you'll never be able to see." So whereas fighting the good fight is a big part of what this is all about, and speaking practically and realistically, another part of this has to do with the faith in the great mystery behind all this. Because the nature of consciousness is very mysterious. The nature of consciousness is very mysterious. The nature of enlightenment itself is very mysterious. We're working with forces in consciousness that we can't understand with the mind. The forces in consciousness, currents in consciousness that exist, that the mind can't understand. So all we can do in moments like that is to submit and to surrender, to what we can feel, but we can't see with the mind. We can't understand it, but we can't make rational sense of it. And for all that to be okay. So a big part of this process also is also letting go in a big way, letting go of our minds.
I think that's really what the challenge is because I think, what is a battle for me is wanting to fight it. So the idea is what you're saying, just to let go and have faith and don't make it into a fight. Just trust in God, and it doesn't have to be a battle.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
But it might be a battle sometimes anyway.
I know. Yeah, I have to be okay with that.
Yeah, because life is very unpredictable, Adam. We don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next.
Yeah.
So we're in a situation that's fundamentally out of our control. And it's very interesting from different perspectives, from different moments of spiritual insight. Sometimes I have paradoxical insights that are very liberating. One of these paradoxical insights is that reality, the unfolding of reality, is totally unpredictable, chaotic, and uncontrollable. And all one can do then is let go unconditionally, absolutely, radically, completely, and learn what it means to trust beyond the mind enormously. On one hand, and then another paradoxical insight is moments of seeing kind of radical interconnected synchronicity in multiple levels all at the same time, and seeing how everything that happens is a result of everything else that's happened, which is a result of everything else that's happened, which is a result of everything else that's happened. And everything that exists and everything that's unfolding is part of a web. In Mahayana Buddhism, we call it Indra's web. And to seeing how in those moments of insight, everything suddenly makes perfect sense, and suddenly everything could only be as it is, and could not be any other than it is, because of the way things are, and because of the complex web of interconnectedness that's so absolute and all-encompassing.
And it gave me the insight that insanity is trying to control any of that, which I can't.
But Adam, what I wanted you to understand here is the paradoxical nature of the two insights I described.
Yeah.
That's what's interesting, because I think they're true. They're two truths that are an absolute paradox, but they're both true.
Right.
So on one hand, it's unpredictable chaos from one second to the next, and all we can do is let go and trust. And in the other, there's a recognition that the way everything is because of the way everything's related to everything else. Everything makes deep mind transcending sense in ways that are absolutely extraordinary, profound, and miraculous. And both of those truths are true. In relation to the second one, we start to see that there's laws that are operating that we can't see most of the time, that are at work. And that gives great faith when we can have these glimpses. But Adam, also, are you aware that what I was speaking about tonight about the fact that we're all having the same experience?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're aware, Adam, that a lot of people are struggling just like you are?
Oh, yeah. I understand. Just the content of the story seems to be unique to me. But yes, I understand that really well. Yeah.
So if you understand that there are a lot of people are struggling in similar ways to yourself,
Yeah.
it helps us to loosen the illusion of I'm the only one who's suffering through this.
Yeah.
I'm the only one who's suffering through this unique experience, which is a very nasty habit of the ego. And there's nothing more humiliating to the ego than to realize there's nothing unique about its own experience and it's not special.
Yeah.
Because the ego likes to be special, either in terms of its positive experiences or negative experiences. It always wants to find a way to stand out and be seen as being special. So not being special and not being unique is kind of the ego's worst nightmare.
Yeah, you're right. And my ego has created this like experience like that. I'm this unique individual that nobody can understand, or it's very hard to understand. Which I understand. That's the ego that does that.
I think you're pretty easy to understand. To the times we've spoken, it's not very hard to understand you.
Yeah.
So Adam, you got to work on faith, baby. That's the solution to your problem.
Okay, that'll be my moment-to-moment mantra.
Because even if you have enormous faith, even if you cultivate the capacity to experience enormous faith, it's not going to protect you from suffering. Some suffering, pain, and death.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's not just the fear, it's the fear of the fear. It's afraid of experiencing the fear.
But if you can cultivate big faith, it will include all the worst possible things that might happen.
Right. Yeah.
Because you realize that the ultimate truth is bigger than anything relative could ever be, any relative experience could ever be, including pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Easy to say, but it's true.
Yeah.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So Ananda is saying faith in that she wants us to come home too. The desire goes both ways.
Yeah, that's always true. Like you've heard me say before, consciousness always delights in its own self-recognition. So as I've spoken about many times, consciousness in a mysterious way seems to be seeking for its own self-recognition. So in that way, what you're saying is very true.
Yeah, my experience is that sometimes, I'm reaching and it seems like she's not paying attention. And then other times she's reaching and it seems like a big part of the spiritual path is becoming attuned and purified and trusting enough and longing enough that when she reaches back, that I'm there to say yes.
Sounds good to me. That's why we have the first 10 of the teaching. I was always wanting to be free more than anything else in every moment, no matter what. Which means always being ready to be ready. To either say yes or let go or both.
I don't have more questions, Andrew, right now. Now Pramod has a question.
Okay.
It seems in the depths of the discovering the being more and more deeply, the outside experience of it can be quite opposite, even if temporarily. And I recall this mentioned in your book as well. It also strikes me that irrespective of the various perspectives we hold in ourselves, it is the outer expression of one of these perspectives that brings about the becoming in a way. Through that relative self perspective, is this a sound understanding or just a fabricated sense of importance of the smaller self?
I don't understand the question, Pramod. I can't understand it. You want to just ask me and see if maybe I can understand if you ask me. Does this question relate to the talk I gave tonight?
And am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, it's connected to the talk because I was wondering in the way what I tried to
Can you turn up your volume because I
explain
can hardly
is
hear you?
that
Can you speak
It's
louder?
hard to hear, promote you
is this good?
Yes, that's
now.
better.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just linking today's thought to the perspective of holding so many selves, or I can't find the right word, in the way that uh, this being has a lot of voices. And when it comes to the relative point, only let's say one of these voices find expression on the outside.
I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry.
Okay.
Can you use the language I was using tonight? That would help me to understand what you're saying.
So from an absolute perspective, when looking at the observing the functioning of the relative self and the choices that seem to be made in that observance of the relative self from the absolute perspective, I think my question is about to what degree does observing the relative self choices, does it even define or reflect on the absolute or not?
The more
I hope
objectively,
that's
the more
maybe a little more
objective,
clear.
the more objectively you can see your small self, the better. The more objective, because the absolute can see the relative, but the relative can't see the absolute. So the more you can see objectively, or the more you can see objectively with a greater measure of objectivity, your small self, then you bring the light of this liberated awareness onto this relative dimension of your own experience, and that's what brings liberated awareness, or the potential for liberation. But we always want to try to do the right thing, no matter who's doing it, no matter which part of ourself we think is doing the right thing. We just want to do it. We don't want to be too careful. Let's be more interested in doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time than being too concerned which self is doing it. Because promote, quite often doing beautiful things, saying beautiful things, and beautiful actions that come from the deepest part of ourselves, the true self, the authentic self, can happen faster than thought. So if there's too much self scrutiny and too much trying to understand who's doing what, we won't be trusting enough in our own innate spiritual potential to allow these beautiful things to happen through us faster than thought. So in a sense, you want to let the God principle act through you, speak through you, work through you. And the way to do that is to be trusting that it can and that it will. And if that's not what's happening, if it's your small self at work, you'll see the painful consequences of that pretty quickly. You'll realize what happened and why it happened. Follow what I'm saying?
Yes, Andrew, that offers clarity in way of how I view things, and it's never viewed in the moment itself. I think I
Exactly.
find myself always learning in retrospect.
That's how it
So-
works. The true self and the authentic self move faster than thought. So after the fact, you can realize, oh, that was my true self. Oh, that was my authentic self. But you'll never know it in the moment because it's moving too quickly. And if you trust in the best part of your own self, that will happen more and more often. But you'll do things or say things or act in ways or expressing things that you didn't even understand or were aware of at the time. That's when you realize that there's much more to who we are than we're consciously aware of. That includes our unconscious self and our superconscious self. So the superconscious self can also act in ways that move much faster than our conscious mind can be aware of. But the more we can let go of the mind, the more we can let go of the ego, these kind of things can happen more and more often until it becomes like a higher flow state, where we're doing things and saying things and acting in ways that are just happening spontaneously without thought, that surprise us and make us realize that there's something very beautiful happening through us, not as a result of effort, but as a result of surrender and trust and faith. And yeah. How does that sound?
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
I don't have more questions, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.